This pattern is called Pablo's Yellow Sally. I'm going to give credit where credit is due, and that's why it's called Pablo's. I actually saw this as a video just the other day, and just love some of the techniques that are used on this pattern, so I needed to give it a try. And I really like the result and how it turned out. So I'm going to share it with you today. I haven't actually fished this, but I'm looking forward to going out on the waters and giving it a try. It's a Yellow Sally, as the name kind of implies. I've got a size 14 scud hook here in my vise, and I'm using yellow Nanosilk. I'm using Nanosilk here just because we're going to tie in a deer hair set of legs on this, and that's one of the more unique parts of this pattern. And I want to create a really nice yellow base here of thread. So I'll make a couple of passes. We're going to cover this yellow up with some LifeFlex, kind of an elasticy material, and I want the yellow to show through on it. So that's why I want to make sure that I'm creating a nice bright yellow underbase on this, so it kind of shows through on the LifeFlex that we're going to be tying on. But I'm going to try as close as I can to take touching wraps on this, just to help that yellow stand out a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and start this. I started it a little bit ahead of the eye of the hook. I want to leave some space. We're going to put a foam body on this and deer hair legs, like I'd mentioned. And so it's kind of important that I leave plenty of space for that to happen. So I'm not going to build up too much bulk, and the Nanosilk will also help us there because it doesn't leave much of a base. So once I've got this just initially started, I'm going to tie in this material here, and this is actually a fulling mill material rather than the brand LifeFlex itself. And kind of get that secured down on my hook with a few thread wraps to secure it in place. I'm going to take these thread wraps fairly tight so I can secure it in place while allowing me to stretch it out without having it come off of my hook shank here. So I'm going to spin my thread counterclockwise just to loosen some of the twists on that thread, allowing it to lay down a little bit smoother. And I'm pulling on this LifeFlex, or this flex material, pretty tight, which will kind of thin it out, especially as I start the wraps down here at the butt end. I want it to be pretty thin. We're going to have a little bit of a taper on this. So I'm going to go ahead and take these wraps back here down to the base. And once I get down here to the base, I'll just move that out of the way a little bit, the thread or the flex material out of the way a little bit. And each pass I make up, I'm trying as close as I can, like I said before, to take touching wraps. Sometimes I'm not incredibly good at that, and it probably is exaggerated a little bit with this macro lens on here. So I'm just going to go ahead and take this up. I'm going to leave plenty of room right through here for me to tie on that foam wing. So once I'm kind of happy where that's lying, we're actually going to put a little red butt end on this. I'm just using a Sharpie in a red color, because yellow Sallies will often have this, the females will. I'm just making sure I get all of this kind of covered. So we're going to go ahead and get our flex material. In my first wraps here, I'm going to pull this fairly tight. That'll keep this pretty thin at the base, but it'll also, by stretching it out, it's going to help that translucence, that transparency. This is a white color, but it'll let that color show through that we have on the base here. And as I move up, just like I often do with this, especially depending on what I'm trying to accomplish, I'm going to let up a little bit on the tension, just a little bit as I move up, and that's going to help create some of that tapering, but it's also going to create kind of that rib look a little bit. I'm just going to take these wraps, loosening it just a hair a little bit as I move my way up. And because I have this on such a downward angle, there's a good chance that this stuff is going to start slipping on me a little bit as we get here towards where I want to tie it off. And I'm going to tie it off right here. My thread slid down a little bit, just back it off a couple of wraps. Keeping tension on the flex material so it doesn't come unwrapped, I'm going to go ahead and secure that in place with a couple of thread wraps over the top of it. And then I'm going to go ahead and take a couple of wraps in front of it as well. So right here is a good time for me to go ahead and I'm finished with the abdomen. I'm going to go ahead and shift my hook back up. So now it's a little bit more parallel to my tying surface. At this point I'm going to tie in my foam body. I'm just using a 2mm yellow foam. You can see I've kind of tapered it on the end. That's going to be the end sticking out on the back end of the body here. I'm going to have that sticking over the end of my hook a little bit. I'm just going to go hold that in place, and I'm going to take my first wrap. Again, I'm leaving plenty of space towards the eye of the hook to be able to tie in the legs with the deer hair here. So I'm going to secure that down nice and tight. I'm going to create a little bit of a band with the thread here. So I'm securing this pretty tight, but you do want to be a little bit careful, knowing that it's nanosilk, so it'll have a habit of wanting to cut right through that foam. I'm going to pull that foam backwards, get a wrap or two on the shank of the hook, and then I'm going to come right back up to where I tied that in. So next I've got a little bunch of Adams Gray Z yarn, Z-Lon. And that's going to give us a nice little wing that's going to pop up here. I'm going to take a wrap or two to secure that onto the hook shank. So we're going to double this over, so I'm going to go ahead and take the end that's facing the, headed towards the eye of the hook. Just take my bodkin here. I'm going to grab myself a little bit, pull it towards the eye of the hook a little bit to give myself a little bit extra right there. And I'm just going to go ahead and take a wrap over the top of that. I'll pull that a little bit so I don't have quite as much, and what that's going to do, you'll see a little bit, is it's going to more centralize, keep that Z yarn more towards the very middle of the foam body. And once I've got that tied down, I'm going to go ahead and take a few wraps to cover it up a little bit. So now I've got it like that. I'm going to go ahead and pull my thread, my foam backwards again, and take another few wraps right underneath the base of the foam body there. And I'm just going to take a little wisp of pale yellow rabbit fur dubbing. Go ahead and dub that on. This is going to be used to create just a little bit of a bump right in front of that foam body, and that's going to help our legs so they don't quite expand out like it usually does when we're tying in deer hair pretty tight. So that's the only purpose here. And it's also going to create a little bit of a thorax. So I'm just going to tie that back, trying to keep it fairly tight so I'm not leaving myself a little bit of space for that deer hair to go on and in. And notice I'm just pulling everything backwards as I'm working on this. And if I've got stragglers, I'm just going to pull everything a little bit backwards. Got a lot of those fibers stuck on my fingers. I'll just go ahead and wrap forwards. That will help me clean it all up. So for the legs, I'm just going to use some coastal deer hair here. I've cut off a little bit of a clump of it, as usual. With deer hair, you can see I've got a lot of under fur and mess. So I'm going to just take my comb, pinch it pretty tight so I don't lose too many of these fibers. And I'm just going to comb through that. That's just going to help us stack this material a little bit better. And once we've cleaned that up pretty good, you'll notice the ends are really not lined up. So we'll go ahead and grab our stacker. I'm going to feed the tips right into our stacker. And we'll go ahead and stack that here. So now that I've got that stacked, you can see the tips of those deer hairs are nice and lined up. I've got them facing back towards the bend of the hook. I'll go ahead and pinch those, remove them from my stacker. So they're looking about like that. I want these to be maybe about half the length of the shank of the hook here. I'm going to pull that material back and gently sit those right on top of that foam. And I'm going to pinch those, trying to keep them towards the center of the shank of the hook here. I'm going to take that first wrap. I'm not going to pull it too tight yet until I'm pulling it around and upwards. And now that I've got it upwards, I'm going to go ahead and begin pulling it a bit tighter. So now those are facing backwards. We're just going to go ahead and clean up these tip ends. These butt ends, they're not the tip ends, sorry. Usually I'll clip the ends off before I tie them in, but in this pattern that's not what we're going to do. We're going to pull everything backwards again, and we're going to just continue securing this down to behind the eye of the hook, just with a few thread wraps. I'm going to add a little bit more of that yellow, pale yellow dubbing. Again, stroking everything kind of back. From here, I'm just going to kind of take a look from the front of the fly. I'm going to kind of move my body a little bit. I want to split those deer hair, so about half of them are on one side of that foam, about half are on the other side of that foam. Going to work on pulling that foam right over the top here. And as I pull that over the top, I'm going to kind of stroke those deer hair fibers backwards. And with those in place like that, I'm going to go ahead and take a wrap over the top of my foam. Pull that nice and tight with a couple of thread wraps. We're kind of looking like this. And then I'm going to pull that foam backwards, allowing a little bit of it to kind of go over the eye of the hook. Not too far, but a little bit. I'm going to take a couple of wraps right over the top of that, pull it tight, and that's going to give us a nice little head. After I've got a couple of wraps on that, I'm going to go ahead and take a wrap or two right on the eye of the hook, or right behind it. You don't want it on the eye of the hook, or you're going to have a hell of a time trying to get your tippet through. Now I'm going to grab my whip finisher. I'm going to whip finish right up, right behind the eye, not on the foam, but behind the eye. Go ahead and release that from our whip finisher. I'm going to come in with my thread cutter and we'll go ahead and remove our thread. So now we're just going to do a little bit of cleanup and some final touches. I'm going to take my excess foam here, take my scissors, and kind of stretch that foam up a little bit. Go ahead and clip that off. I'm also now going to go ahead and grab these deer hairs, kind of pull them more a little bit towards the front. You'll see what that does is it's going to help them kind of spread out, making our legs here. And I'm also going to grab this Z yarn. Going to clip it off to just a little bit shorter than the body length. And for the last touch, we're going to actually put an eye on the head here. I'm just using a fine tip Sharpie. I like using a fine tip here, and be very careful with it. Because the foam is going to suck that ink right out of it. So you can get a really big blobby eye if you're not careful. So I've got one on one side, I'm just going to turn it on the other side, do the same thing. And with that, there you have it. There's the Pablo's Yellow Sally. I know this video probably took a little bit of extra time because it's got a lot of steps involved. A really fun pattern to try, and I really like, you know, I've done all of this with the foam before, but I really like this tying the deer hair in here like that. That coastal deer hair is more fine, so it's going to make nice kind of delicate legs here, and it does it in a way that there aren't deer hair sticking out of the bottom, so it's going to ride flat on the water with the butt end probably dipping down in a little bit, and our nice tapered foam tail sitting and riding on the surface of the water. So if you're adventurous, grab yourself a hook, throw it in your vise, and give this one a shot.